All right.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Kristen Moorhead. I'm with the Arrowhead Center at New Mexico State University. We host these monthly workshops to feature the enterprise advisors who work with Arrowhead Center and volunteer their time to help our clients on their journey to starting a business. And this month, we are excited to feature Seth Gardenswartz with Blackgarden Law, and I will turn it over to him.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for attending. We're going to try to cover a fair amount of ground here quickly. I have a couple of housekeeping items I have to do, of course, myself. And so is the screen visible? Is that working, that part?
Yep, it looks good.
Okay, so first things first, I am not your attorney. I might be the attorney of a couple people online here, but unless we have an engagement agreement, I'm not your attorney. And if you'd like to, by staying in this chat room or continuing to watch this presentation, you are manifesting your assent to these terms and conditions, which are super important. And you notice here that I've got my hero, Saul Goodman, as an attorney here in the background, right? And so this is the scene where he says, give me $1, right? And so if you have not given me or Saul $1, neither one of us are your attorneys. And so you should not rely on that advice. And if you don't want to read this whole thing, you just read the last sentence that says, you are batshit crazy to like watch someone for an hour and think it's legal advice. Like that's not okay, right? Or that goes for accountants and doctors too. So, you know, if they're not working for you, it's just general information. All right. So bueno, yeah, cool. All right, so this is what we're gonna do today. We're gonna go through this little agenda, and I have the privilege of working with lots of different people and having a career that's involved, you know, sporting goods and real estate and all kinds of cool stuff. But I am privileged today to represent about 80 or 90% of the craft beer brewed in New Mexico and Arizona, Colorado, but a lot of New Mexico stuff. And when people say you work in the beer and wine industry, they tend to pay attention. So I might use a couple examples from that. But this is kind of our agenda on this. I don't know what screen you're looking at, but for me, it's over here. So as we get started, I think most of you are on this call. At least the workshop is about branding new businesses. So I'm going to just assume we'll talk a little about existing businesses. But if we're going to talk about new businesses, I want to talk about that for just a second. So I want you to close your eyes. I'll close my camera lens, right? So close your eyes and picture your new business. And so raise your hand, and remember, I can see you. So raise your hand when you are picturing the product that you're building. No one's got product, okay, all right. So now keep your hands up. And for those of you who don't have your hands up, raise your hand if you picture the service that you're gonna be providing in your new business. Okay, and now you can open your eyes. And so those are all super important, but of course you're not doing any one of those, you're actually building a business, and a business is a lot more than just a product or service. It's got customers and vendors and all kinds of relationships. And it is not just that one thing. And if there's anything that I think we see consistently with people starting new businesses, they tend to be super, super hyper-focused, which is not a bad thing, on their product or service. But remember, a lot of people fail with pretty good products because they haven't wrap their head around what they're actually doing, which is building a business, right? You are manifesting your assent by either nodding or not nodding, all right? So by staying in the room. Cool. I love it the lawyers smile at me. This is so awesome. All right. Why does your business need a name? Raise your hand virtually or actually if you know. Matt, yes. Why do businesses need a name? Unmute. Any ideas?
To identify themselves.
Right. So to identify themselves, but like for what reasons? I know you know the answer, so so just slow roll a little bit for us, right? Anyone else? I'm calling people by name.
Trademark.
Yes, but why would you need a trademark? So the name kind of comes before the trademark. So why do you name your children?
Differentiate them from others.
Yes. To differentiate them from others. And so let's keep that in mind for the next 40 minutes or so. So your business needs a name, a differentiator, so you can pay your taxes, right? You want to make sure that the IRS knows that the right businesses paid their taxes. You have to have it, so you have an EIN number for that. You also have a state number for that. You have to have a business registered with the appropriate Secretary of State. So if someone wants to sue you, they can deliver the package to the right agent, right? So that's that differentiator. And those are things that you probably weren't thinking about. But the reason that we're in this webinar today, and the reason that we brought up trademarks and things like that, is you want to identify and distinguish your business as the distinct provider of goods and services in your marketplace. And all of us tell ourselves that our business is 1000% unique, that there's nothing else like us on the planet. And that is both 100% true and 100% untrue. You might be the only purveyor of locally sourced, cruelty-free ingredients to make rattlesnake pozole, right? So you might be the only one who's ever done that. But other people eat pozole. In fact, other people eat all kinds of food. So there are substitutes for what you do. And you want to be able to distinguish yourself from the other competitors in the marketplace. So it is very important. And when you name your children, you don't like just say number one son, number two son, daughter number one, which is the third child. But you don't do that. You give them names that distinguish them and that they can use to distinguish themselves from other people. And suddenly, when we started living past 30, we had to create last names too, so we could further distinguish people amongst the folks in the classroom or the fields or whatever. So, are we all on the same page with that? So we got to distinguish ourselves. Okay, so this is not a new problem. We've been naming children and businesses forever. And so this is an example of the merchant marks in the city of Norwich. And as you can see, they're kind of made the same way because they probably had pretty limited use of materials. And any guesses as to why there's no letters in any of them? Because no one could read. Like not many people could actually read. So these marks were all visual marks because it was the way that merchants could differentiate themselves from each other. And of course, this is pretty important because if you go get your artisan pozole from one customer and you get violently ill, you don't want to go back to them. And in fact, if you go to someplace and have a great meal and you want to bring your date to that place again, you want to make sure that's not the place that made you sick. You want to go to that same place. So it's important to differentiate. So in popular culture, if you, I won't play the clip here, but this is from season 1 in Game of Thrones. And this is when the dad, this is Ned Stark, walks in and finds his daughter with a sword, and he picks it up and he says, "I recognize this maker's mark. This is Mickens' work." So what does that mean? He says, first of all, I recognize this little symbol and I know who made it. This is, and I looked this up for a longer presentation that I do that's a little bit more dorky. And there's a symbol, it's a wolf, and he's got a Wikipedia page. He's the blacksmith of Winterfell. And so you kind of know that the blacksmith of Winterfell makes good stuff or crappy stuff. We don't know yet. But the point is, that guy does not want Swords R Us to show up in Winterfell and start putting a very similar mark all over their steel or maybe aluminum, because that would suck for him. Like he's spent a lifetime apprenticing and working in the blacksmith shop and hammering stuff away to create a great reputation, and he just wants someone else going up and go, "I'll put the wolf on my blade," and they won't think it's him, right? So it's important to have that mark to differentiate ourselves from the other sword makers. And this is another fantastic quote. So all of Mad Men is based in part on Ogilvy and some of the 40s and 50s, 60s ad men on Madison Avenue. And so he gives this great quote in the middle of the series where his customers, his clients are saying, oh, I don't think this looks luxurious enough, or I don't think this looks, basically like the industry that I'm trying to be in. And he says, you're welcome, right? You're not going to be successful by blending in with the rest of the industry. And this is a mistake that is very understandable, that a lot of people make, where they are getting into a space, they're like, oh, I want to look like the other cool brands in my space. And you actually don't, unless you've got a ton of money, because you need to differentiate yourself. You need to stand out from those other parties. And this is actually, so I was drawn to this sort of work because I like the marriage of marketing, sort of human behavior, and the law in this case, which is pretty practical, which kind of really works with those things. It's more about the substance than the form, than getting it, having the right number of dots on the line. Our brains are naturally filters. We don't see things that are like everything else, because actually people who do have a hard time functioning, because you don't have enough processing power to constantly notice every little thing. You can walk around your own house in the dark with your eyes closed. You don't need to think about where things are, because you already know where things are. If you smack into something, that you should pay attention to. And that is kind of what you're doing when you're branding a new business, or even when you're evolving the brand of an existing business. Our brains naturally filter out stuff that is the same. And if you think that's not true, think about the garish television commercials and advertising messages that we see all the time that don't make it through to our consciousness because they all seem so similar. I mean, right now we're drowning in political ads. We can't even tell who they are because they're all kind of the same, donut. It's like, so-and-so said they were so-and-so, but really they're not, and da-da-da-da, and therefore paid for by some group that you can't figure out. Like they're always the same, so why bother listening? Because you never learn anything from them. So you really want to stand out in terms of, you want to use that to your advantage, which takes a little bit of mental strength to say, oh, I'm not going to look like everybody else. I'm going to have to explain it to my mom, which might not be intuitive for her. So I'm going to take the next couple of minutes here and talk about what a brand actually is. And when we get to do these things live, we can wander around the room. In fact, you'll forgive me if I forget and start wandering around this room. But most people, when you say what's a brand, they say it's the logo, or it's the name, or it's that thing. And for anybody here working in media or graphics or do any of that kind of stuff, so your clients come into you, or let me guess, your clients come into you and they say, let me tell you about my brand. My brand means blah, 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 blah. And that is 1000% bullshit. Like that's what they want their brand to be, but their brand is none of that until they convince everybody else that it is. So these are two really powerful quotes from the same guy, Marty Neumer, who's a very well-known thinker on brand and branding. So he says, the brand is not a logo, it's an identity. It's a feeling, right? It's a feeling that you get when you encounter it. And it can be good or bad. And then this is the part that I often share with people. It's never what you say it is. It's what everyone else says it is. Like when people do mission statements, they always say, our goal is to provide the highest quality insert product or service available in the insert marketplace, right? And it's like, again, first of all, it sounds like everybody else, so you don't pay attention to it. And second of all, who cares unless it's true? Like it's not at all the case. Like it's irrelevant. So this is an ad from the 50s, and I think this was an Ogilvy ad. So Ogilvy did this ad, and this was back in the days. And for those of you who are students at MSU, they used to have these things called magazines, and they were like physical stacks of paper with glossy stuff in the middle of it, and people paid to have them delivered to their house. So this is an ad in one of those magazines, and Ogilvy really understood that branding was about a feeling, because I don't know who this guy is, but he seems like a total badass. Like he's a pirate. He's getting his suit measured, and he's probably thinking about how to buy out his competitor and maybe sell a yacht or something else. Like, I don't know, this dude is on it, and I can buy a shirt like him and maybe absorb some of that coolness. And so this image is somewhat, striking, and I might want to read like the, American men are beginning to realize that it's ridiculous. Wow, this is like, he's telling this story. And so the brand as a feeling is really important to understand, and it's not the feeling you want it to be until you make it that way. So I hope this is the last quote I've got in this deck. This is from Michael Eisner, who was the CEO of Disney, and he points out that a brand is not static. It's not just one thing. You don't like make it and stay there. It changes every time the consumer interacts or fails to interact with your brand. Like you might have your favorite, store, and if you go in there and the parking lot is a mess or you can't park there, it could change your opinion of that brand. It might be your favorite place in the world, and you have one really crappy interaction with an employee or even with another customer, and it will impact, and you might spend a little of that brand equity and maybe get a chance to get it back, but it goes up and down. Etzel was not built to be a brand synonymous with mechanical failure. Like that's not what they started with. It evolved into something else. An established brand has real value for the owner. And so this is a real example. These are two fairly almost identical products, right? So these are both 200 weight fleece vests. And if you're interested in what 200 weight means, I'll talk about it as long as you can stand it, not during this point, but it's basically a type of polyester fleece. These two products are made out of the same stuff. They're made a little bit differently. I promise you the one on the left, the zipper will last 100 times as long. You will be sick of it. You may have grown out of it, or like, but these products are very, very similar if you have them on. But one of them sells for under $20, and the other one sells for easily 5 times more. And that's the basic version. That's not the one that's got the gnarling to it, or the one that's got the windstopper behind it, or any of that stuff. Now, are these two products, is the product on the left worth 5 times more than the product on the right? Hell yeah. Hell yeah. You know how I know? Because people pay that. Because the image, the orange image of the label right there, that's my Patagonia vest. I've had it for, I think I bought it in 2005 or 6. And I still wear it all winter long. And you know what? I feel more than 5 times better wearing that vest than wearing the one, if I owned one on the left. And I probably have owned one as off-brand as that, but I might wear that underneath something. But it says something about me when I wear that other brand. Like it says that, and I don't know what you think it says. You might think it says that he's a Patagucci snob or something like that. But first of all, I've had it for 15 years and it looks like it's brand new, A. B, to me, it says that I care about the environment, I care about the outdoors, I'm willing to spend a little bit more, to support a company that supports these things. That's what I think I'm saying with that. But it's really a feeling that I have when I put it on. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel 5 times as good. It was a great investment to spend that extra $80 to buy that garment. So, and think of what that meant for Patagonia. That meant that they could manufacture this product for probably 5 or 10 or 15% more than the Walmart vest, but they could charge 5 times as much. And what could they do with that? Well, they do a lot of things with that. They support causes, they pay their people better, they do a ton of things with that. But you could do anything you want with that if you have that kind of brand equity. And this is another local example. This is the craft beer line at Isotopes Park during a United game. right? So fortunate to work with two of those brands. And I took this picture because I stood in line for 20 minutes to get a local craft beer. That's mine that she's pulling right there, the Bosque IPA. And at any time while I was standing in that line, I could have reached out and bought a Miller product for about $4. I probably paid 11 or 12 for a pint of the Bosque IPA. So I waited longer to spend more. And why did I do that? Well, I mean, the beer is definitely better, but it's similar to the vest, right? It made me feel better to do it. And by the way, I felt like I met some cool people online with me because we were all in that we want to support local and we care about quality, and we, like this is 2 slides and a little too much time to devote to saying brands are where all the good feeling that you create with your business collect. And that is when people say, oh, what's your favorite brewery? What kind of ski pants should I buy? Where should I go for dinner? Who should I get to do my taxes? They're going to say something. And what they say is a signal of how they feel about those brands. And that is, for a successful business, that can easily be the biggest asset they have. So, for example, this is one of my clients. And when I started working with them, they had been very fortunate and worked extremely hard, started a brewery, picked a name, created a couple products, picked a couple more names. And this particular product won a gold medal at the largest American beer festival in the country, right? So they went from, they were 10 months old when that happened. And so they obviously were onto something. And all they did for the next 5 years was buy this shiny steel stuff, because those are assets, man. Like I'm going to invest in assets in my business. Like I can spend 50 grand on a tank, and I will get a 25% return on investment over the next 3 years for doing that. Those are assets, right? Any bankers on this call? Because only bankers believe that stuff like that's an asset. Like that is not an asset. Like you went and paid for that. It got moved to your place. It got bolted into the concrete. How saleable do you think that thing is? Like the asset value to the bank is that they will take it away from you if you don't pay them. That's going to hurt. But it's not really an asset. Like it's a tool. It means it's legally an asset. It's accounting wise, it's an asset. But in terms of the evolution of thinking about this brand, he basically began to realize that he's got this brewery and this canning line and this brew house and this building and all these things. But this is a regional, nationally recognized product in a competitive industry. And if a earthquake swallowed up the brewery today, they'd be selling this beer in 2 weeks because they own the name. And they have the recipe, and they have they'll fly up to Sleeping Giant in Denver, and they'll contract for the brewing, and they've got the artwork for the cans. They'll be shipping to all their distributors. They will be in business. It'll hurt, but they'll be in business. If they didn't own the name, they didn't have the recognition in the brand. Forget about the ownership part. They just had the recognition in the brand, and the brewery got swallowed up. What would they have? Nothing. People would be going there just because it's a convenient place on the way home, or because it's okay. But they could substitute that pretty easily. But here's a brand that's really, and this is a very smart, bright group of people who run this brewery. They didn't really get that their asset was that their physical assets were being eclipsed by their brand assets until they were probably 5 or 6 years into their business. Then they really began to get that. So names are valuable, and the brand elements can be extremely valuable and can often be overlooked, right? It's easy to overlook. And part of this, again, I remember this is about branding your new business, and this is all about not making mistakes in the beginning that would make it more difficult in the end. This particular brand was not easy to get trademark rights for. I'm showing you the end process, right? But it took some work. It took it took time, it took energy, it took money. And it would have been easier if up front we had made some different choices, right? So the impact of a brand is a little bit different in different industries. So this is this sliding scale. So at the top of the curve here, we've got luxury goods. People care about brand the most in luxury goods because they're buying it in part as a status symbol. They want to show you the brand, right? So no one's going to go take all the badges off their cars, particularly not the expensive cars, because part of the reason they drive them is to show off that they can drive an expensive car, right? That's just part of the deal. No, like you can't, Rolex won't sell watches on quality alone. They have to demonstrate that. Like that's core class. So luxury goods, spirits are right in there. Obviously people are and part of that is not just the idea that it's a status symbol, but also that there's one wine expert that I know of who's on this call right now, right? And I guarantee that Michael could blind test two glasses of wine and tell us for sure which one's much better, right? But a lot of us couldn't, and we might rely on the brand as a signal for quality. So that's right there. So my point is, the consumer goods, much more important. And down at the end, bulk chemicals, no one cares where you bought your methylamine, right? It's another little New Mexico reference in here. It's not even so Intel is a great example. Intel Inside, they like made the component more valuable than the shell. But generally, when you get down to bulk chemicals or utilities, people don't really care whose power you're buying, unless they've made a big effort to make it special. So now we're getting to the part where we talk about why we choose good names. If you're taking an overview course in the law, the section that talks about trademarks is in unfair competition. And why is it unfair competition? Because if you go back to our blacksmith of Winterfell, he doesn't want to apprentice and work in the steamy, dark, cold, abusive environment of the blacksmith shop, building his reputation so someone else can stamp the wolf on other blades. So these are all examples of these are counterfeits, right? So these are not just like a little bit close. They made these to look like somebody else. So when we talk to new brands, and again, some of you who are in the marketing space, new brands, all they care about in many cases is, I just want to use this name. And so, okay, it's important to figure out if you can use the name. And what does that mean? Does that mean, is there somebody else who's got stronger rights to the name who might be able to stop me someday down the road? That's important, that's fundamental. But established brands, back to the award-winning IPA, they want to be able to stop somebody else from using the name. That is intellectual property. What's the fundamental, what do you have to have a property right? Like property is a big, very interesting first-year law school course. But to have property means, and Matt's going to answer, right? But anyone else know what the fundamental characteristic of property is? The right to do what?
Exclude others from using it.
Thank you, Matt, for saving me. Yes, it's the right to exclude, right? You have, that's fun. You don't have a property right if you can't exclude, right? So people say it's the right to use it. It's like, I get the right to use my house, of course, but the fact that I have the right to exclude someone else from using it, the fact that I have the right to exclude someone from parking in my parking lot at the office, even if I don't own, even if I'm a lessor, I have a little mini narrow property right in my reserved parking space, right? Because I can say, hey, it's my space, or that's one of our spaces, not your space. That's property. So if you're developing a brand, you want to be able to have that property right. You want to be able to say, okay, when you start off, it's got a very different meaning. When Elevated IPA launched, dude, it was just another West Coast IPA in a small market in the middle of the country. And now you can buy it. People trade it, right? Because it's a specialty regional, well-known asset. So established brands want the right to defend. And what I encourage you to do now, all of you, is to think about your brand as established. Like, think about it when you're doing $1, $5, $10, $50 million a year in revenue. What do you want out of your brand? What do you want to be able to do? What would bug you to see in terms of people showing up with branding that's close to yours? So some of you will recognize this. So this is a continuum of what we call distinctiveness. So we start at the beginning saying you got to have names to distinguish. And so a brand doesn't really work as a brand. And forget about getting the whole trademark side. Brand doesn't work as a brand unless it can distinguish a single source, like one company or group or entity, as the one who made or delivered the product or service. So if you get that, so these brands on the, or these, these brands here on the left, these are not even weak, they're generic. So who knows the reference for the can of food? Anyone know where this comes from? It's from Repo Man, right? So, and it was kind of a character in the movie where, and it was a time when generics were popular in grocery stores. Right next to it, we have beer that was also featured in the movie, made by what's now Kroger. But these are generic for the property. There's no property rights in this. You might have property rights in the design of the can, maybe, but very generic. In here, you get these descriptive marks. And so these are all registered trademarks on this chart here. But I know for a fact, because I looked it up when I put it on this deck, American Apparel had to work really hard, prove that they had used the mark exclusively for it's a 2F, it was a 2F, started on the secondary register. Again, why sign up for that? And company grew pretty quickly, so fortunately they had some money to spend, but a big drag. American Airlines, funny thing about airlines, it takes a fortune to start an airlines. New airlines don't pop up all over the place, so they had a little bit of a advantage. Plus, trademarks were easier to get in the 50s, so probably the 40s. But as you go up here, these marks here towards the upper right, they are either arbitrary, meaning they're real words or real or recognizable symbols, but they're not affiliated with the goods or services, Apple computers, for example. And then Kodak is not a word. Kodak was made up. So that's the strongest possible mark, because you can't say, you can't get very close to Kodak at all without looking like you're infringing. Kodak failed to defend its business, but they did a good job creating what was like an 80-year brand. I don't know how long they were around before they, I think they're still in Chapter 11 right now. So another interesting thing is a brand can be anything. Most of us know them as words or pictures, but they can be shapes of products. They can be not just the NBC logo, but the dun dun dun, that is a registered trademark. It can be a color, like you should not try to create a digestive, ingestible medicine with that shade of purple, because I think it's AstraZeneca will come after you in a big, ugly way. They can also be, there are several touch trademarks, like actual registered marks for the velvet feel of the label on a wine bottle. Thank you, Stephen Stanswood, for publishing that blog post last week. Anything that distinguishes your product from another product. And to be distinguishing, it can't be descriptive, which also means it can't be in the shape instance, can't be functional. These can be distinguishing attributes. So they have to identify a source of particular goods or services. I like this. I like this image because for those of us who are from the Southwest, this is a very, very famous San Ildefonso potter. And this is a black pot. And I don't think I could walk into a store and tell the really good ones from the ones that are not so valuable. But if it's got Maria's name on it, I know it's worth so much more than a pot that does not, because she's famous. She's famous for the quality and for and beyond just the quality, the reputation. So let's talk about the law for a second, and then we'll get into some of the practical ways to think about branding. So the Trademark Act won't. So the trademark, the law, it's called the Lanham Act, is basically that part of the law that can give brand owners exclusive rights to use their brand, the symbol, the color, the word, etc. It cannot be close enough to another brand that it would cause a likelihood of confusion, or the customer could be, or the potential customer could be tricked or deceived, or just unwittingly mistake that good is coming from someone else. So you can't, like the Mike trademark for looking like the Nike. That's really a counterfeit, but it's close enough by far that you could be deceived. So the key factors in looking at this are they don't have to be identical. They just have to be similar enough. And the analysis is always how close are the marks and how similar are the goods and services. So we've got Delta Airlines, Delta Dental, and Delta Faucets. These are all registered trademarks. But the reason they can all be registered trademarks is you don't walk into Lowe's and go, oh, cool, the airline's making toilets now. That's just not a natural thing. Toilets are not sold in the same channels of trade as airline flights or dental insurance. So these are different enough that you can have very similar trademarks without the potential for confusing consumers. So a mark is considered merely descriptive if it describes an ingredient, quality, characteristic, function, feature, purpose of the specified goods or services. So very often people mistakenly think that if they can name their business pretty much exactly what their business does or makes, that'll be great for them because they'll own it. And that is almost entirely not true, right? So if I can't create San Diego Auto Body Repair for an auto body repair place in San Diego, because the law is not going to let one shop take those words away from all the other people who do auto body repair in San Diego. Now, if you called yourself San Diego Auto Body Repair and you were in Poughkeepsie, New York, that might be distinguishing. Like that might set you apart. So if you were going to create a language school that taught language and had a laundromat, you would probably not be able to get French Laundry as a mark. But for a restaurant, it's actually pretty distinguishing, right? It's pretty unique. It sets you apart, and it works to distinguish the goods or services. If you're a new business, it is totally okay to say distinguishing and then what you do. So Bosque Brewing Company totally works, right? That's okay. As your mark grows, people don't even use the brewing company anymore. They just say Bosque. They say, Ford Motor Company. They just say this is a Ford. As the mark grows, you don't have to use that anymore. Initially, you can use it if you choose to. It's not going to be part of your property right, really. You're going to have to say, you're going to have to disclaim any exclusive use of those words because everybody has to use them. So a couple deeper cuts here. People frequently say, oh, what if we just spell it different? No, the law is very practical here. You can spell it differently. It's still going to be confusing. Foreign language equivalents. This one trips a lot of people up. If it's a foreign language word that is commonly spoken in the US, the trademark office will treat it as an equivalent. So cocina means kitchen. You can't say, you can't trick people by saying you're not using kitchen, using cocina. It's the same thing in many languages, including Chinese. The relatedness of goods and service, we talked about this, primarily a surname. It's fun, we get this a lot. If you have a very common last name, you may not be able to easily get a trademark right. You can probably use it. It's very, very unlikely they'll take it away from you, but it's harder to develop trademark rights. It's doable, but it's a little harder. So all this 40 minutes was lead up to choosing a strong brand, right? And so what I'm trying to get across is, if you choose a very distinctive brand from the beginning, it's going to be a lot easier. And it's a lot more important if you're a consumer brand, if you're selling to consumers, because people are going to care a lot. They're going to need to distinguish a lot more. So there's another quote, sorry, but it's really good. And it's from Paul Graham. And if you're startup people, you should be reading a lot more Paul Graham anyway. So you're welcome. So Paul Graham says brilliantly, "There's nothing intrinsically great about your current name. Nearly all your attachment to it comes from it being attached to you." And this, if you follow this link, it comes from a whole post about it and involves domain names. He basically points out that if you imagine you'd started with a different name, you'd be just as attached to that name now, even if it was yesterday. And the reason I chose this image is because, would you be any less attached to your dog if you had named it differently, or it had come to you with a name? Of course not. Like that, whatever name it had would trigger all that feeling and emotion that you have for it anyway, right? So think about your, think about your ex, any ex. If any of you have ever had an ex, think about that. Because when you first heard that name, you probably felt one way about it, and now you probably feel differently about it, right? So it is what you bring to it. It doesn't come with anything. And the less it comes with, the stronger that brand becomes for you, right? So when you're picking a brand, we talk about standing out, and it is important to stand out, and it's hard to stand out. So this is an example from the spirits industry, and this is a company called Jefferson's Bourbon, and so their deal, so they're unique. They're the only ones who make bourbon this particular way. But of course, there's a lot of people who make bourbon. But the way they make the bourbon is they age it in barrels, and they put the barrels in ships, and the ships are at sea where it rocks, right? So the bourbon sloshes around in the barrels, and it has more contact with the barrels, so it ages better. Is that true? Does that make a difference? I have no idea. I have no idea. Michael, do you know? Does that make a difference?
I don't know as much about spirits, but I'm guessing, but I don't think it probably makes a huge difference. But who knows? Maybe.
Let's assume probably doesn't. But I heard about this once a year ago, and I still remember it. Like it's a cool story. Like it works as a message that gets through. And all their branding, or much of their branding, has a nautical theme, and they actually do and support ocean research and ocean recovery as part of their brand. I remember it. Like that part works. They've stood out now in this very crowded space of craft spirits. So really, really bad stuff does actually happen with people making mistakes. And I realize that some of you are from all over the country, but these are a couple examples from the Mountain Time Zone. This is this lovely couple who started a bakery right in Albuquerque, in Hoffmantown Center, for those of you who are familiar with Albuquerque. And they didn't go through any of this process. They named their bakery Doughboy. And they had actually a pretty good story around it. This was the founder's nickname when he was a kid, Doughboy. So Matt, can you guess what might have happened when they named their bakery Doughboy?
They probably got a pretty harsh cease and desist letter, if not suit.
From General Mills, who happens to have a plant in Albuquerque. And what actually happened is somebody walked into the plant and said, "Oh, it's cool you guys opened a retail store here in town." And the plant manager said, "What?" And probably sent an email back to corporate. And these people, I've never met them, but I looked at their social media posts and they seem really lovely people, but they just had no clue and didn't listen to anybody who tried to help them, because they were like, how can someone prevent us from using that name? They can't prevent me using that name. That's my name. I can use it. It's like, well, you can use it, but not to operate a bakery, because this is a 50-year-old brand, which is publicly traded. The officers and directors have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders. And do you think the brand is, what's more valuable? Do you think the plant in Albuquerque or the brand globally? Right? The brand globally. Like, they don't even need to own any factories. They can make the donuts and Pop-Tarts wherever they want to and sell them under that brand. Like, that's powerful. So this place got shut down. Like, they did not make it. They tried to fight it. They didn't accept it, and they didn't survive. So don't pick a fight that you don't need to fight. It would not have mattered if they changed their name at all. In fact, they would have gotten a little free publicity, and it would have been great. It would have worked out. So the big guys don't always win. There was another business here in New Mexico called Dee's Cheesecake Factory. It opened for business before the, it opened for business after the Cheesecake Factory in California, but before they filed for their federal trademark application. So the Cheesecake Factory in I think it was LA opens, they operate. Dee's opens, they operate. The Cheesecake Factory is operating only in California. Then they file a federal trademark application. They don't think about it for a couple of decades. Then they, oh, there's 2 million people in Albuquerque. Let's open a store there. No, these guys could stop them. Why? Because they didn't even have a registration, but they were a prior user. They had senior rights. They kept them out from, I can't remember what the time was. And I don't know this for a fact, but my understanding is they even extracted a little bit of something at the end to let Cheesecake Factory open here a little sooner. So the big guys don't always win, but registrations matter. We've got lots more examples. This is one from the beer industry, same thing, like filing this and back. I got to talk to the one of the founders of New Belgium about this, and she was like, it was a shakedown. Kim Jordan told me the story over dinner one time. Crazy story where they tried to shake down New Belgium, and they were just like, no. So I'm going to leave a little bit of time for questions, but quick things on how to brand. So number one, these are all myths. If your name's registered to the Secretary of State, that just tells that if you're in real estate, you've got 20 acres, you divide into 4 parcels. It's Main Street A, Main Street B, Main Street C. That's not a trademark. It's not a trade name. You've got no rights in that, virtually no rights. Like, us trademark lawyers use registrations because we know people think they're trade names. That gives us a signal that someone might be trying to use it. Registering your domain is not trademark use. And the fact you own a domain is, could be meaningless. Spelling, we talked about. Names and logos are different. If you do some searching on your own and you like the results, particularly if you see no problems, you're probably in trouble. Like, you're like, if you're getting the answer you wanted, generally you're in trouble. Like, that's always the case, right? So you need a little bit of challenge. So be careful with that. And some of these are sort of some legal things. So as we, when we work on projects for clients, if they're new marks, if it's a new business, we usually say you should put your time and energy into finding a mark that's going to be easy to get and easy to defend. And if you're an existing mark, if you've done millions of dollars in the, under that name, then it's worth spending a little time and money to see if you can get some rights behind it. The way we rank the names for businesses or products are, for a business, your business name, it's foundational. It's the bottom of the pyramid. You got to get that, or you're in a difficult place. Going back to New Belgium, Fat Tire was a product that became so valuable, it sort of flipped it for a while. And that's why the next thing up are your core products. So your core products, if you might just have one thing. You might just be an accounting firm and you are REDW accounting or whatever, that's fine. But if you're a product company, a couple products are really important. Then if you've got important but secondary products, seasonal products, taglines I put off on the side. People often get really torqued about their taglines. Again, we always assume that people have a limited amount of time and energy to spend on things, so we sort of put them in order. If a tagline is going to be really important to you, yeah, it's important to lock it up. And then the question is like, how are you going to defend it? Like, what does that really mean to you? So this is the way that we sort of recommend it. If you're going to, if you've got a name, and I usually don't like it when people say, I have a new business, here's my name. I'm like, okay, it'd be better if you said, I have a new business, here are my top 5 names. Like that's you're mentally in a much better place. Because if you're totally invested in one name, you're emotional, and we're all animals, we can get a little emotional. But it's if Matt or I go check that name and say, you might get emotional about it. If you get emotional about it, that's when you wind up spending money you probably didn't need to spend. Whether you spend it on lawyers up front or you spend it rebranding down the road, you might wind up spending more money than you need to. So one thing is we check vertical sites, and so you can search Google, but if you're in the restaurant space, for example, you can check restaurant directories and see if there are other people using names that are similar to yours. If you're a winery, you can go to Total Wine's website. There's other websites that catalog products like that, and just see if there are other sort of similar names. And then you've got the USPTO website, which is, I wouldn't call it extremely user friendly, and it's very easy to get a false negative on that. It's easy to and it's easy to get a false positive too. So, but you can definitely find, and you don't want to, if your name is Howdy Doodies Dog Wash and Cantina, you want to find what is really going to be your brand element, which would be Howdy Doody. And if I was doing that search, I would search Howdy and Doody and Howdy Doody, and I would narrow it down to the service classes that you're in. Third-party databases. So, you check vertical sites, you see how many hits are out there. Think about how distinct or descriptive your thing is. If it's an existing brand, we might try to do something if there's a couple conflicts, we might try to work around those, which is a little beyond the scope of this discussion. And the same is true of using the PTO database. I think that when I look at third-party data, if there's conflicts, I always want to know who the conflicts are. Who are they? How do they behave? Are they litigious? Is it a solo small person? Is it like a small entity? And I'm usually wrong when I just sort of try to intuit if they're going to be cool when we talk to them. But I'm always thinking like, are they a jerk? Or are they not a jerk? Right? Like, are they? And sometimes, like, you should be a jerk about your core brand name. Like if someone's like, oh, they wouldn't let me use that name, they got super pissy about it. It's like, dude, they've spent a lifetime building that brand. Like that's imagine if you were in their place. Like that's a good way to think about it, is to sort of flip the script and say, imagine this was your brand, you were selling $10 million a year in this brand, you had distribution agreements all over the Southwest, and you're about to go into the Midwest, and then some other Yahoo shows up and wants to use the name. How do you feel about that? Because that's the position you're putting the other party in. So to kind of recap, think about your business as an established business down the road. Don't sign up for something that's going to be difficult and expensive upfront. You've got better things to spend money on: product, marketing, building hiring employees, that kind of stuff. You don't want to spend money on answering demand letters and C&D letters. Do a search, and I encourage you to reach out to people who in business who could be helpful to you in this process, and people that you trust, people that you think have your back. You're on the Arrowhead Center site, so they've got some great resources. Talk to people that you know and trust. There are brands out there for that stuff too. And then make a decision and think about if you want to file or not. When I started doing trademark law, I would tell people, let's file your word mark in the broadest possible way, which is going to the most powerful protection for you, because it's the best return on your investment. And that's all good advice, except that today there's so much pressure on the namespace. There's the most used 100,000 words in our language have all been involved in one or more trademark applications at least. So it's hard. So now we usually start with something that we think we can get and then work out from there. But if your brand is going to be if you're going to be operating in multiple states, if you're selling online, if you are not a hyper-local brand, it's pretty important to think about your right to defend that brand nationally. So this is obviously not a good strategy. Don't do this. We recommend you audit this. This slide is more for existing businesses. And so that's my content for this presentation. Are there any questions?
Yeah, and feel free to go ahead and mute yourself if you've got a question.
Yeah, Seth, I have a question. How much do you value, or how important is it to have a brand align domain name and .com TLD? And I suppose it would, it'd be different industry to industry, but kind of generally, where does that fit in?
That's a great question. I actually just wrote something about this. That quote from Paul Graham is taken from a blog post he wrote in 2015 about how you absolutely must have the .com that matches your name. And what happened after that is we got a lot of really wacky named companies, right? Because companies that were just totally made up names because they couldn't find domains of words that existed in .com. There's only so many, unless, under 12 characters, like all that other stuff. Now things have changed a little bit. You'll notice that technology startup companies are getting a little bit more normal names. And the reason is because a whole new generation, many of you on this call have grown up and you're not so .com focused. So .io and .co have a lot more gravitas. They don't feel like, oh, I'm buying, a snake oil on the dark web. No, it's like we have a big tech client locally, and their domain, their TLD is .io, and it's, again, in the tech space, it's a little easier to be a .io. I've got a Colorado brewery, and if you're in Colorado, .co is a great domain name, right? Because it helps out there a little bit as well. But I think it's opened up a little bit. If you're a consumer brand, obviously there's still a little bit more gravitas to .com. I don't think that your domain name should be really different than your name, than your business name. So obviously, if you are Blackgarden Law PC, you don't have to. You don't want to have all of that in there. It'd be nice if you're just sort of Blackgarden Law. So that part is something to pay attention to. But I think about it this way: how are people going to hear about you? Someone's going to say the name and they're going to type it into the browser bar and they're going to misspell it. So hopefully they hit a result that is good for you. And the tech people on the call know that you can work on your SEO a little bit and engineer those search results. But I think it's pretty important to have that matchup. I hate it when it's really, really different, when people's domain name is something just totally not connected to the word they use to identify themselves.
Thanks, Seth.
Anybody else?
I know I'll get the criticism later, like looking at some of the, you. The professor.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
Dana, go ahead.
For like businesses that have like a doing business as
Yeah.
name? Does all of this still apply to that doing business as name?
Absolutely. So doing business as is your trade name. So, so just as an example, when I joined my law partner, we formed our law firm, we took her old solo practice corporation, which was the law office of Candace Owens, PC. And we just did business as Blackgarden Law for a couple of years until we went and changed the name. Blackgarden Law is our name. Like that's how we, in fact, I was like, she's like, is it going to be my first name, your last name? I was like, I'm a branding lawyer. Over my dead body, are we going to, you know, brand ourselves like a accounting firm or Crosby, Stills and Nash? Like we're going to be, we want to build a brand, right? So, but we just did business as, and just as a dorky little thing, in some states, you can't be a DBA without registering. And in some states you can. And in some of those states where you can't if you're professional, if you're a law firm or accounting firm or something like that. But in New Mexico, you don't have to register anything at all. You can just do business as. So you can be, San Mateo Lot 2 can be, LLC, do business as, liquid granola. Like that's totally fine. But that's your brand. Your brand is the name of your corporation is only relevant to the Secretary of State when you're getting sued, paying taxes, parties to contracts. That was on the list. That part's important. But your trade name is how people differentiate you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Any other lawyers on this call that I don't, besides Luke and Matt? Thank God.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this talk today, Seth. There was a lot of great information. Seth's contact information is up on the screen. And also, if you have any questions about business support services in New Mexico, you can reach out to the Arrowhead Center team at NMSU. You can check out our website, arrowheadcenter.nmsu.edu. And we will be posting this session up on our YouTube page as soon as it's processed. And I thank you all for joining us and hope to see you for future events and wish you the best on your business journey.
Yeah, thanks so much. By the way, the other network advisors in the Arrowhead Center are much smarter than I am. So if you have any, I'm probably the only branding geek on there, but legal geek. But it's a really great group of advisors. If you look at the website, people in technology, manufacturing, a lot of different spaces. So take advantage of, if you're in, some of you I know are in one of the cohorts, but it's a very cool group of people, and the next couple seminars look really, really interesting.
Awesome. Thanks, Seth. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time today, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks a lot.